And so I will go right into the second session and ask Engineer George Nicholson to come now and do the second part of his presentation, where we will look at the solutions for this whole building phenomena that we are experiencing.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody had a nice lunch. So what we're discussing in this session is solutions for new buildings and also what to consider when you're retrofitting existing buildings. Happily, the two are pretty similar, so I don't need to really distinguish between them. My first recommendation will be no surprise to you. Hire competent professionals. That makes all the difference in your final project, whether you have a problem with an existing building or whether it's a new construction that you're embarking upon. I'm reminded of a little story I saw on Facebook today about this luxury ship that was about to be launched. None of the experts could get the engine started. So they called this old fellow who had years of experience in dealing with ship engines, brought a bag of tools, looked at the ship engine up and down for about an hour, and took out this small hammer, tapped the engine, and it started. Of course, the owners are happy. A week later, they get a bill for $10,000. You say, well, he didn't do anything. He just tapped it with a hammer. Please send itemized invoice. Itemized invoice came back with tapping with hammer, $2. Knowing where to tap, $9,998. That's precisely the situation when you have an air conditioning problem. Who you call first is going to determine how long it's going to take you, whether they are a registered engineer or not. Their experience has to be such that they can deal with the problem quickly and get you out of your problem situation. If you're doing a new construction, or even an existing construction, I said, one thing you want to understand is what type of system you're using. If you've got a mini split system, which is where you have the units mounted on the wall, going to a condenser outside, luckily nowadays we have what I referred to earlier, called energy recovery ventilators. They allow you to exhaust your space, whether it's your lunch room or your washroom or your photocopy room, and pass it through the energy recovery ventilator and bring in tempered outdoor air. So you're getting filtered fresh air or outdoor air coming into your space without penalizing your system. One thing you have to understand about the mini split units is that they don't deal with humidity very well. They have a limited capacity for humidity. So if you just pump outdoor air into your space, you're going to end up in trouble. If you have a commercial split system, obviously you can choose between positively supplying the space or passive ventilation, but the passive ventilation must be done such that your air balance is maintained. How are you going to use the building? As I also referred to before, speculative buildings are harder to properly manage or design for. You don't know what's going to go in the space, and when you're the landlord and you've got an empty space and somebody comes and said, well, I want to put in a shooting range in here, it's kind of hard to say no, because they know that's, they're going to come in, you're going to spend all that money, and you're going to have customers coming through the door. But you have to ask yourself objectively, am I designed for that? And of course you want to go to your HVAC professional and ask him that question, because if he gets it wrong, at least you can pin it on somebody. So if you have a fairly standard expectation of occupancy, offices, etc., but it's speculative, so you don't know who's going to come in. It could be a company that works 9 to 5, or a company that's dealing with offshore clients, so they come in 3 o'clock in the morning, or they leave at 12 o'clock at night. You can't have the building running just for them. So you have to design that flexibility into your system. Make sure there's roof space or external space where you can accommodate a separate system for them when they're operating outside of your normal operating hours. It keeps your costs down, it keeps their costs down, and everybody ends up happy. So ERV or outdoor or dedicated outdoor system. So the ERVs I mentioned before, if you have a small space, these are an option for you. If you're dealing with a bigger area which has fluctuating occupancy, like as I said, this room here, or even a building that has varied occupancies, you want to have what's called a dedicated outdoor air system. So that system will take outdoor air, filter it, cool it and dehumidify it before it's introduced into your space. Basically, you turn it on, you forget about it. It doesn't matter if that air is coming into your building. It's keeping your building pressurized. It's nice, cool, dehumidified air. The air balance. Control what comes into your building. Let the good air in, keep the bad air out. That example I gave you before, where the exhaust was operating continuously and the outdoor air was coming in, and then all of a sudden got shut off. That's what happens. You don't see it. You might feel it, but then it adds up to problems that you can't really see or deal with. Maintenance. Got to make sure you allow for proper maintenance. The manufacturers will give you minimum service requirements, clearance requirements around their equipment, because they know what it takes to get that equipment serviced properly. If you or your architect decide, nah, they don't really need all that, we're going to have problems. Proper access to filters, proper access to coils, regular maintenance, and regular maintenance that actually achieves the objective is key. You must factor this into the cost, your operational cost, your annual operation cost. If you don't, then you end up paying the costs that Harold spoke about, which is the unscheduled maintenance, the loss of productivity, the unscheduled replacement of equipment. All of these add up. If you do your cost-benefit analysis, it's easier and simpler to get your equipment serviced on a regular basis by competent technicians than to pay the cost of changing it. And your maintenance regimen must be properly adhered to. Peter asked me a question earlier that I answered about monitoring-based commissioning. That keeps you on top of what's happening with your system as you're operating it. You're not waiting for crises to come up before you start to react. But when you have your system being monitored, you want to hope or ensure that the people on the other side of the monitoring understand what's going on. It's not good enough for them to say, yeah, we know what temperatures you have and what humidities you have. When something goes wrong, they have to be able to pinpoint it. So if it's not operating correctly, and they have all the data, and they don't tell you that there's a problem, then you have a problem. And knowing what to do is a missing piece of that puzzle. That's what's going to keep your system operating properly, your efficiencies at their optimum level, and your staff healthy. It's my opinion, and it's probably one shared, I believe, by others, is that we need to have an industry-wide approach to what we're doing here. It's not simply a problem of engineers or technicians or contractors or building owners. There's an education that's required for everybody in the construction industry, in the property development industry, in the air conditioning industry, to ensure that everybody understands what can go wrong, and when it goes wrong, what to do about it. We have to change our approach from basic troubleshooting to a more holistic approach. The analogy I've used is that washing your clothes and then putting them on the grass to dry doesn't give you clean clothes. It gives you dirty clothes, or introducing another allergen into your system. Fixing one symptom without understanding the cause and possibly other effects will not help or result in a healthy building. Improved enforcement of global industry standards. So our current process when we're building a new building or doing a significant renovation is that you apply for EPD through EPD for town and country planning approval in terms of your building ventilation. So you submit your drawings to EPD. As I said, it doesn't have to be done by a registered engineer. Anybody can hand in a line diagram that meets the standards. So many air changes, this room is being ventilated, fine. If it meets those standards, the EPD will approve it. The design, you get your town country planning approval. And as I said before, there's no further inspections required. Some may be done, but there are none required. So what happens after that? Who ensures that what you put on the line diagram or your ventilation design is actually installed? You didn't have an engineer do it, or you had an engineer do it, and you didn't get it right. There's nobody checking that. That should be done at the first fix of the installation, which means when you first put the ducts up and the holes are in the walls and the ceiling's down, you have somebody come and inspect it, a third party. Doesn't have to be an engineer, it has to be somebody who understands what you're trying to achieve. When you actually turn it on, who's going to verify that it actually operates as it's supposed to? We don't do that either. We just put it in, we assume that it's working, everybody goes along the merry way, oops, staff are feeling sick. And then once it's in and running, how do we ensure that it continues to do what it's supposed to do? We have the annual inspections of elevators, annual inspections of pools, annual or even monthly inspections of restaurants, as I said before. But air conditioning systems in place for 20 years, oh, we have an AC contractor come and servicing it. Means nothing. Compressor goes, he doesn't tell you, or you don't notice because it's still cool in the building, but you've got problems with your humidity. Somebody's hot, well, she's just miserable. Oh, we need to have somebody come and look at the AC again. You have to make sure that our ventilation systems, even if it's not our air conditioning systems, our ventilation systems, the ones that are maintaining the internal environment, the pressures of the building, or the air changes are working optimally at all times. If you don't do that, we're slowly killing people in Barbados. So the part of the discussion we're going to have now is how we can approach that, what's practical in terms of resolving it, and where we go from here. So one suggestion I'd like to throw out for discussion, if Paula, we're at that stage now, because I've finished my presentation. So one thing I'd like to throw out for discussion is having third parties doing inspections or reviews of designs that are submitted to EPD. Now you have to understand EPD, I think, has about 5 or 6 people in it. Consider a period where you have multiple construction projects being submitted for approval. They have to go through each of those, understand what's there, and sign off on it. Those same people can't be expected to also monitor health in restaurants, pools, coastal. There's so much for them to do. You know, they have to keep an eye on what people are doing in terms of disposal of petroleum products. We need third parties, independent inspectors, to be out there in the field checking the construction of an installation of these air conditioning units. We need them to be verified on an annual basis or more frequently. And we need to ensure that we have people in the field that are competent to do these inspections. Now, I'm not bucking for more work. I have a lot on my plate. But we do have a lot of engineers that are not employed currently. They're trained at the University of the West Indies. They're out there doing jobs in construction. That's not what they're trained for. They're doing drawings, they're checking quantities. Those are the people that we can target for training. We have people in the air conditioning industry who are technicians, have been technicians for years. You know, when I was first starting off, I had no shame in asking the duct guys what to do next. What do they suggest? They've been in the industry for 20, 30 years. They know more than me. Right? We have these young engineers that we could be training to be inspectors, sending them out as the inspectorate to ensure that we have proper ventilation systems operating in our buildings, because it's a national crisis. It's a silent national crisis until you get something blown up on the front page of the newspaper. But there are a lot of people here who are suffering without actually knowing they're suffering. I'm also guilty of going to building owners and saying, what the hell are you doing? How can these people be in this environment and not notice it? You get used to it. You walk in, oh, it just smells like that. I walk into that scenario and I can smell right away that is a big issue. That's my training. That's what I've been doing for 26 years. We have a lot of people that could be doing that, that could provide that front line of defense against sick building syndrome and building related illnesses, just to make it clear. All right, the front line of defense should not be Dr. Dawn Aline being the patient advocate. It shouldn't get that far if we're doing our job. The reason why they have all these inspections in the States is because their buildings tend to be very well sealed because they're dealing with summer and winter. So they have to air condition and cool, and then they have to heat in the winter. Any air that leaks in or out is a cost penalty to them. But that means that they have to be very careful about how they manage their indoor environment. Here in the Caribbean, if our windows leak a little bit, no. We got walls that rain's coming through, big deal. But air can get through where water can't get through. So if you've got water getting through, you've definitely got a porous building, and you've got air coming in from outside. That's moisture coming through as well. We have to be able to recognize these things and to deal with them quickly. I haven't let anybody speak, so if anybody has any questions on anything I've just said before Paula opens the floor to general questions. Yes, Peter. Sure.
Hi, George. That was very well said. I couldn't support you anymore in what you just said. Actually, I'll share this with you. Many years ago, I sat on a subcommittee to deal with the Building Standards Authority. And it's my opinion that the whole move towards regulation should be towards using independent professionals. And it is already being done in government, because the Labor Department, they use presently a system of independent assessment with pressure vessels and boilers and elevators, where you already have certified professionals who can review the operation of those vessels and determine if they meet the required standards. And a similar system should be used not only for the construction industry as it relates to installation, but I would even go a step further and say before the drawings have even been approved, you can use an independent system of evaluation to determine if the drawing meets the required standards. And I couldn't support you anymore on that. The industry needs to have that level of certification to ensure that what is being done correctly and that it will not put people's lives at risk. The other thing that needs to be done, as you correctly said, is that at some point in time during the builder's life, it needs to constantly be re-evaluated to see if the efficiencies of the equipment that is being installed have changed. Fan motors, for example, the motor will go weak. The blades will change the performance. And those things will seriously impact on the ventilation of the building. But some professional needs to be in there to determine if those things are still meeting the desired intent. So I give you full support on that.
Thank you, Peter. It wasn't actually a question, but thanks for the support. All right, I'll let Paula open up the floor to questions.
Well, the floor is really open to questions. If anybody has any questions, they can start. If not, I have a question that I can start off with, and it has to do with the commissioning part of the equipment. When the equipment is commissioned, I am not certain that in all of the commissioning that CFM readings are being taken. And I guess as part of my training, I believe that you have to have some kind of tangible or empirical evidence to start with, because how will you know that the system is degrading over time or that has degraded over time if you don't have a value that you start with? And therefore, I am not certain that in most commissioning of systems that the owner is given a set of readings to start with and say, look, this is where we started with your building at, and this is what you can use to have anybody else. It doesn't have to be me that has started the process, but anybody else that can come in and review that thereafter, year on year, or whatever interval you want to have it at. And you would know then if your system is requiring an intervention or not.
Thank you, Paula. Part of our specifications is that the contractor is required to provide airside readings after they go in and balance. Now, as I said, I will design a system. I will put airflow values that I'm expecting in various areas. But when you actually install the system, you may get different readings, and you're going to try and balance to what I get. So within 10% is what is an acceptable difference, either more or less. But then when the building is occupied, that's when you need to balance again. You balance for comfort. So we look at exposures, shading, occupancy, where people are sitting, etc., and we design for that. But when you actually sit in the space, things can change. They're then expected to come back with our drawing or their drawing marked up showing the air values that they're getting. This is what we've done for comfort readings. Now, generally, unless the fan is degrading, those air values tend to be fairly constant. That's not the critical element of your system. It's your coil where the cooling and dehumidification takes place. And your filters, they are the ones that can clog up and start to affect your airflow. That's where your maintenance comes in. If you're doing all of that and you're still getting reduced airflow values, then you either have a hole in your duct or you do have a problem with your fan motor. So it's good to know what you have in terms of airflow, but that's not the most critical thing, most critical consideration early on in the life of the project. Yes, Trevor.
Okay, if I may make a brief intervention at this point. I think the presenters have done an excellent job so far of demonstrating, one, that we have a very complex issue, and it's becoming increasingly complex because of technology. And two, that we certainly seem to have the expertise in Barbados to understand the issues and to be able to understand what needs to be done to resolve those issues. I wonder if we can spend, and I'm particularly interested in hearing Mr. Oxley and yourself, George, talk about what it will take for us to move from a situation where we know what needs to be done to a situation where the rules of operation of Barbados calls for us to do what needs to be done. Surely there's some difference between what happens here, I think Peter touched on it, where despite knowing what needs to be done, we often see that not being done, and other jurisdictions where that is the exception rather than the rule. What I would like to understand is, can you put your finger on what specifically is different in jurisdictions where this works, and like Barbados, for example, where we have an unusually large number of failures? I just want to close by saying there certainly must be a reason why doctors are licensed. Because many people think that they know the solutions to ailments, but we don't have a situation where anyone can just prescribe medicine, for example. there are rules in place where people who we presume are experts with the experience, the training, and the regulation are reserved to make those sort of decisions. Is this not where we need to be going in terms of building and the maintenance and installation of HVAC systems? Can we move? Because I'm more than happy that we understand the complexity of the technology, that we have the expertise, that actually understand the issue and know what needs to be done. The failing is, why are we not doing it? Why could I have said this morning, without any dispute, that we have not learned from the mistakes of the last 20 years, and we could well have another large building fail to the point of almost abandonment in the next couple of months? Why is that?
Well, I know the one you're referring to. I'm going to personally assure you that will not happen, for reasons I will not elaborate on. But if there's one thing that I would say has allowed this to continue to the point where it does, without any, let's say, affirmative action, because the EPD review of drawings was an action that was taken, but it's inadequate, is a perceived lack of urgency. So an electrical system, you put in an electrical system in a building, somebody can turn on a switch and get electrocuted. So it's immediate risk to life and limb. An elevator can plunge and you can die. A pool you can jump into once and get an infection. Restaurants, that's self-explanatory. It can take you 20 years to get sick from air conditioning ventilation system that's done wrong. It could take less, and not everybody's affected. But it doesn't happen right away. It's not walk into a building, oh my God, everybody dies. So a perceived lack of urgency. You then have persons who purport to be facilities maintenance personnel who really don't know what they're doing, and ensure that the amount of funds actually dedicated to maintenance are inadequate because they don't perceive it as an issue. Or a chief operating officer or CFO who decides they would rather buy more computers than improve the service on the equipment. So the lack of perception that it's an urgent issue, which is why an independent inspector is required. We don't have the personnel available to the government or the regulatory bodies to do those inspections. It would just be too heavy a burden. That's why we need to train persons. It needs to be a cost of operation to the building owner or the developer. But when you juxtapose the cost of that operation against the cost of loss of productivity, loss of profits, low staff morale, it's not an expense. It's actually saving you money. But you try and make that argument to a building owner without it being the law. Doesn't work.
Right. So it needs to be the law.
It needs to be part of the law.
Thank you. Certainly support everything that was said there. We have the big issue where there is no system of licensing, there's no system of credentials. So as George shared earlier, you have someone working someplace, they've lost that job and they see janitorial work as easy picking. So they go and buy a mop in the bucket and they come back and they become a janitor. We have many persons who were laborers and then next thing seen with a Suzuki van and they're contractors. Okay? There's no requirement stipulating that on projects you must have an engineer. Many persons use draftsmen and not architects to design their house. So when we have all these issues going on, there is no system of licensing. We have a problem because it comes down to the persuasiveness of professionals to get persons to do things. You can go and give persons the best advice, and at the end of it, they look at you and say, well, there's so much money, you're not doing it. We have persons spending money and doing a report and then put on the report. What's the point? Nobody wants to take the advice because that is no additional cost. So we have to look at it from a very macro level. We have to change the way we do business in Barbados. You asked Trevor in terms of what is different in other jurisdictions, and part of it is having laws that are enforced. You must have stipulated standards what makes a person an engineer? What is the criteria? What is the path? We do it for medical practitioners. You hear about having things signed by a registered medical practitioner as a system for that person to be recognized. But other professions, persons just pick up something and call themselves this, call themselves that, put their heads after their names, and they begin to function. And what they do, the facilities manager, as was mentioned, what they do, something is straight. But there's no system to say, well, this person has not gone through, they have not met a particular criteria. And then we have this way of making laws. Laws are not endpoints. This has been a problem with a lot of our political directorates that whenever there's a problem, oh, we'll make a law, we'll make a law. A law without regulations is a waste of time. And I say that again, it's a waste of time. We had a Factories Act that came to life in 1982, died in December 31st, 2012, not one regulation. It live and die. That's like people live and die with their children, right? Basically what's just happened. Now we have a new Safety and Health at Work Act, no regulations. The regulations will give the details. The regulations give the standard to achieve. So if you're going to say in a law that the employer should take reasonable steps to ensure the safety, health, and welfare of his employees, and that they should take make sure the place is adequately ventilated. What is adequate? You need now to start telling me how many air changes. What is the level of particulates that you would allow? What's the level of VOCs? Start to insist on procedures for facility maintenance, and have records, have the same inspectorate. The inspectorate is going to be of no use if you don't have standards. So Paula alluded to the system of inspectorate that's being used now, what's called the competent persons under the Safety and Health at Work Act. They are given a mandate, and they are told, well, these pressure vessels and so on, steam receivers and so on, must be inspected at least once every 12 months. And they are supposed to look for certain things. And if there are certain issues like pitting, or they think the pressure, the maximum pressure of the initial rating is not safe now, that they can specify an alternative lower pressure and so on. They have a mandate and they have guidelines. So if you're going to bring a system of inspection, and I fully support it, I fully support that we need to have licensing. And whenever it comes up, people start talking about, again, the poor black man. They put the poor black man out of job. Facilitate it. TVET is now going through this process of NVQs, which allow persons to get qualifications on their experience. So there's no argument about, oh, everybody can do a degree. You can qualify lots of these persons, and they know more than those with degrees, because they are functional persons, and they can be licensed. And that way you can separate those who know what they're doing versus those who just want a job. Many persons march off of jobs and saying, I'm gonna work for myself. You realize that? I was only having this discussion last week about why a lot of small businesses fail. And a lot of them fail because persons start them for the wrong reason. They don't look at the market, they don't look at the qualifications, they simply say, I'm tired of working for other people, I'm gonna work for myself. And then they look around for something that's easy. Oh, contractor, a lot of building going on. Oh, I'm up on the bucket, I am industrial cleaner. Oh, I'm going to buy a spray can, and I'm going to become a pest control person. So we need to go the route of licensing. That's part of the solution. A route of having legislation supported by regulations. We need values, the same values Paul is talking about. Because to simply have acts of parliament that give umbrella, and acts are necessary. The act is there so that the regulation can be born. The provision is there within the act for regulations. And we have acts that live and die, and we have acts that are in existence now that have no regulations, and therefore it comes down to guesswork, and it comes down to the feeling and the cooperation and the will of the property's owner, the employer, the manager, whatever. That is the problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Harold. I had a question there about enforcement, but I think that you kind of touched on that. We have a question here in the back. If you can just go to the mic.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Just a question for George Nicholson. We've spoken a lot.
Sorry, before you think, can you just indicate who you are?
Sorry,
yeah.
forgive me. My name is Emerson Webster from Gyra Consultants, Quantity
Thank you.
Surveyors. Yes, a question for George. I realize we've spoken a lot about buildings on the more large-scale level, but I think a question that would touch a lot of people, especially people with smaller offices, a very simple one. In terms of split system air conditioners, how often approximately should those be serviced? Because you often have those that are running for weeks and months and years on end, and nobody's ever touched them. And of course, by then the filters are, very built up. So just a simple question, how often on average should a split system be serviced?
It really depends on the usage and your environment. Now, the thing about a split system is that the ones that are on the walls, at least, are commonly used at home, so they're designed for easy access. You pull the lid off, take the filter out, run it under the hose, stick it back in. So that doesn't take a lot of effort. So the internal component of your system is something that you can deal with yourself. Having the external component properly serviced, I would say, depending on the location, every 2 to 3 months. If it's an office environment, you want it done at least, at least every 3 months. Especially in our environment, we get a lot of salt, we get a lot of dust. If it's nice and moist outside, the dust and the salt cling to the coils and start to corrode it. You reduce the efficiency. You crank it up to all because it's not cooling properly. It's just like in your car. Over a period of time, your car starts to reduce its efficiency. It's because the filters are getting clogged up, or because your gas levels are going down. You have to make sure that you're topping up the gas levels. If you notice a rapid decrease in the efficiency, you may have a leak, which can happen after a period of time. But if you're regularly maintaining it, and I said earlier, you don't want just to have it maintained. You want to make sure that the service is achieving the objective. So you should actually get a report on what was done and what was found, not just have a guy say, I service your air conditioning unit, here's the bill. Because they can, just as easily walk up to it, spray some water on it, and charge you $500 for servicing, because you don't know what they've done. What's the pressure? Did I put gas? Did I check for leaks? All that sort of thing. These are the things that you should be looking for when you have a service done on your air conditioning system.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Gabby Scott, and I have been working at the Barbados Workers Union for many years. I would like to applaud the association. I think it was a tremendous job in terms of educating our people. I say this because what I would love, though, to see this expanded, because I would like people who are permanent secretaries. I see a former minister here, but people who can actually employ actual the things that Oxy spoke about. Because when we speak in these fora, and the persons who ought to be making decisions aren't here, it is extremely difficult for them to take action, and some of them are arrogant and don't like to listen. We've been having this problem for many, many years. I remember years ago, I won't call the name of the industrial plant at Newton. We had a big problem, and we spent about 6 to 8 weeks trying to deal with that issue. We had a situation where the AC at that plant had not been monitored or dealt with for 20 years. And I don't have all the technical terminologies for the AC plant, but it was dropping dust like how manna was dropping from heaven with the Israelites. And you had women of childbearing age who were working there. I have known two girls whom I love very much, because I love women. And 2 of them had died from cancer. I'm not saying that they actually, the cancer could be attributed to where they were working, but it could have been. And I'm saying that we need necessarily, because when people die, they're not the rich people that die, The poor working class people who die. I know that. Oxy was talking about the poor black man, but I'm not talking now about color. I'm talking about the class. A lot of poor people die because people who have the responsibility to take action don't take action. And when we protest, trade union movement protest, people said they give it trouble again. But the point is, I'm saying I'm glad, I would like to congratulate you guys, because I think you've done a wonderful job. This is timely, perhaps should have been done before, but it's timely. And I'm hopeful, though, that you could have a situation where you can invite ministerial power to come and understand what's happening, because it is no sense talking. Look, for example, you know how many thousands of dollars are spent every month by the government for private sector people to have space for people who have left other company, left the public service. There's a big building open by the Queen right there in Fairchild Street. that have been closed down for a long time. Schools, I've been involved in the schools because I was the chairman of a school board until Mr. Boyce and them got pushed out. And we have had problems in schools too, because you have situations. We need to look at the schools too, because you have labs, and the people who are working in the schools are not being tutored how to deal with the chemicals. We have a situation where there's a school that have one door, so if there's a problem, how are the children and the students, how are the students and the teachers going to get out? This thing has to be brought, I think, to a level other than this one. Although I'm very happy to have been here, I think the persons who make serious decisions have to understand what's going on. And I really appreciate what Oxley said, because there are a lot of people who pick up a bag and start running around saying they're professionals. There was a particular ministry in Barbados where a particular company went and used a chemical that ought not to have been used, and people had to be polluted. That's costly. That is money in a poor economy like this. So I'm saying we need to, not just to talk, but to seriously take action. If you have to lock up people, lock up people.
Well, thank you, Mr. Scott. I believe somebody mentioned a QC in the audience, so I'm going to leave that one alone. But I believe Mr. Brown, Lieutenant Colonel Brown, referred to earlier the fact that the BAP jury is going to be putting together a position paper to present to the authorities, and that which we will be behind. I fully expect to be asked to contribute after they made a decision. And I do think, and I do believe, that there is a need for us to properly inspect, certify, and regulate what goes on in our construction environment. It's not acceptable for it to continue the way it is.
Okay, so since I'm partly guilty for getting this going, what I would like to steer a little bit further. I think we're getting to where we want. So my question now is, what exactly will we need to change in Barbados to get to the kind of position that we're all talking about, where there are rules and regulations, where we recognize that this is a complicated issue, not to be handled fiddly-diddly. From the time you started, George, you were talking about the fact that, I mean, the way you put it, get the professionals. The fact is, technology has changed. Things that could have been done by simple understanding 20 years ago, now done by complicated automated systems. Even the experts don't always understand what's going on, and we get peer reviews and that kind of thing. It is too complicated. What do we need to do to change the situation in Barbados to one where we appreciate that it's complicated, that it impacts people? I don't think even here we understand how much it is costing this country to have $1 million buildings and schools shut down for decades, to have that same NIS building that you mentioned being out of commission, a large $1 million complex in the middle of Bridgetown, absolutely useless and running to ruin. Can Barbados afford this kind of thing? So I want to know specifically. Well, a couple of months ago, we probably would be pointed at the former minister who happens to be my friend and an engineer. But maybe he can give us some guidelines and some guidance as to next steps. I mean, we need to change. We have been talking about this for a long time. These kind of problems, and it's not only this problem, BAP is also involved with the South Coasters, trying to sort that out. And it's a very, very similar situation where we are dealing with complicated issues and trying to use technology from 10 years ago to deal with what is very complicated situation. Something has got to change. So what I really want us to move towards now is there anybody in the audience that can tell us what do we need to do next? What can BAP do? What can you do? What can George do? And what can we get Mr. Boyce to do?
Anyone? Anyone? No? All right, well,
How can we change this?
I made the point that we have registered engineers in the society who are not working. But being an engineer doesn't give you the knowledge necessarily to achieve the job. I think of all the inspectorates that we have, the most rigorous and the most well-trained is probably our electrical inspectorate. They spend a lot of time training here and overseas. the regulations and the standards are very strictly enforced. Sometimes, from my firm's perspective, excessively so, but they have a job to do. Right? That's not their fault. Those are the regulations. We need a similar inspectorate, and those aren't all engineers, and some of them are not. Some are not engineers. Some of them are. They've went to the Polytechnic and they've been trained in what to look for, and they represent the authority. I would have absolutely no issue with an inspector coming to my site and telling me you missed something, because in the middle of a project, you're designing, you're drawing, you have 5 other projects going on at the same time. You might miss something. As I said to Alan Harvey at the back of the room after my first presentation, I'm not going to name names or point out specific issues because I've made mistakes myself. You're not perfect, and that's why you need somebody looking over what you're doing and verifying that what you've done is correct. Right? So our inspectorate doesn't have to be all engineers. It can be the same technically qualified persons who have been trained and have the tools to go out there and inspect and have the authority to tell you, no, this is not working, you need to make a change. And when you make the change, call me back and I'll pass you. Right? That authority has to extend to the building managers and the CFOs who say, I'm not spending money on more maintenance. Well, sir, madam, if you don't, your building can't operate. Because you're putting people's lives at risk in the name of profit. You'll have to forego your brand new computer system for maybe 6 months, make sure you fix this problem. Because, you know, as Harold said, computers don't work by themselves. If your staff are making errors because they have health issues, or they're not at work because of it, they have health issues, your brand new computer system doesn't make you the profit it's supposed to. You can't get the payback on it. But there has to be an acceptance from those in the construction industry and the property managers and the building owners and the company operatives that this is going to be part of your cost of doing business going forward, and that it is going to save you in the long run. We have all the studies showing what lack of productivity and absenteeism does to your profit margin. Your bottom line does suffer. Your staff don't want to come to work. They want to leave early. They can't focus when they're at work. What's the cost of paying somebody to come and check what has been installed in your building on an annual basis to make sure it's still working properly? What's the cost of having it monitored by somebody who knows what to look for and can tell you that you have a problem? One of the things I look for in my designs is to make sure it's not so complex that somebody can't fix it. Believe me, I've tried and it's failed. I've tried to get fancy sometimes and it has not worked out. Because the AC contractors found a way to hide the fact that he didn't get it installed properly. It looks to be working fine, and then there's a problem. Or something breaks and they decide to bypass it, don't tell me, and there's a problem in the building. So I try to keep my designs simple. It doesn't allow me always to leverage all the new technology that's out there. But as I said before, you can install all the new technology and install it wrong, you still have a problem. If there's a system of inspection or review, whether it's peer review or inspectorate review, they can look at it and say, that's not making sense. It can save you as a building owner some money, because what's been put in isn't going to achieve your objective. Yes, sir.
Question, Eric?
Good afternoon, Eric Clark, BAP. In response to Colonel Brown's question, I have three statements, 3 ideas which I got from you guys here. 3 of them, that we have no laws with regulations with respect to what we are talking about, 1. 2, we don't have licensing of practitioners. And 3, we don't have any procedures for facilities managers. 3. Now, two more important. I really don't know how to quantify. How do you make a sense of urgency a reality? I don't know how to do that. I don't know if anybody can suggest. And the other one would be inadequate allocation of funds. I don't know how you can convert those two into something, as you said, more operational, that you can touch or feel or force somebody to do. But surely somebody in here must have some ideas of how to make a sense of urgency something real. I don't know how to do it.
Well, there's two things that drive people, I always say. That's greed and fear. We've seen an example of the gymnasium pool being shut down because it was tested by the health inspectors and found to be unsatisfactory. The paint was also flaking. They made them close the pool, clean it, and refill it. That's a huge cost, not to mention lost booking and revenue. If you have an inspectorate that has the authority to visit your building on a regular basis, verify that your ventilation system is achieving and maintaining the standards, what's your response? You're going to make sure that you don't get your building shut down and have to get an industrial clean and lose your time and profit, and your employees are off on paid vacation. So you're saving money by not having to do that, and there's a fear factor of not having the stigma that you have a sick building. But people carry on happily every day, going to work, getting sick, delaying the air conditioning servicing, or cheaping out on the actual installation by getting somebody else to do the job without verification. That, I mean, what does the CEO know about whether the air conditioning is going to work or not, right? It's cold air. Who in your business can verify what's been installed? You're trusting the contractor to put in the right thing. Contractor's going to quote you $50,000 to do it, spend $10,000 putting it in, make a $40,000 profit. He's gone. Oh, you don't like his service contract? You get somebody else in. So the new contractor is dealing with the issues left behind by the old contractor. Meanwhile, you spend $1,000 on an inspector to come in, verify that this is going to achieve it, and that it's actually achieving it. Right?
Just a comment to follow up on what you were saying, Eric, that I think that we need to be able to somehow try to start to quantify this dollar figure of how much money is actually spent in lost productivity, the cost of abandonment of buildings, the cost of the replacement of equipment, the foreign exchange costs when you have to replace equipment that, if properly handled and maintained and so on, that you would not have had to replace in the first instance. And if we could somehow try to put a dollar figure to quantify that, maybe then that would also give some kind of impetus to the magnitude of the problem. I think that somebody had mentioned earlier that there doesn't seem to be that urgency. It was George, that urgency, and they are. If people know that people are going to die, that's one of the things that creates urgency. And if people know the cost of things, sometimes that also creates urgency. So perhaps we need to start to be able to quantify those two things and really put a position paper there that kind of reflects that, so that the magnitude of the problem can really be understood. We have another question in the back.
Grafton Bess. BIP cannot regulate itself, given its association and its membership. I believe that BIP should lobby government to amend the Shaw Act to include mandatory inspections, say on an annual basis, similar to inspections for hoists, cranes, elevators, so that buildings and the systems that are in the buildings can be so inspected on an annual basis and certified as a first measure to counteract the sick building syndrome. By doing that, it lends the legislation then expands and becomes more meaningful, and it's the first step in curtailing illnesses that are actually impacting on productivity and the lives of individuals as well.
Any further comments or questions?
Yes, I certainly want to support that whole concept of lobbying, and the example you use is a good one. I have a question. Can anyone tell me if they know the status of the building code? The building code. We heard a lot about that some years ago when we had the campus train fires. Everybody wanted the building code. What's the status of the building code?
Well, as you know, the building code is something that we were asking for in engineering since the 1980s, 83, I think around. Earlier this year, the last outgoing government actually passed the legislation in the House. So it has been passed and is awaiting the usual proclaimment and all that. And as you rightly said, some regulations that actually put a bite to all the things that. So in addition to the code, there's also to the act. There's also a need for codes that say exactly what needs to be enforced. But I mean, thank God for this. At last, it has actually passed the House.
So we're a step further, which is
So
good.
we are
I
a step
think
further.
that all the various interests and bodies and institutions and so on represented here should certainly join and support with trying to lobby for it, because that's really at the end to get the political will there and get these things through. And during the introduction, you would have heard that I was previously the chairperson of the Indoor Air Quality Standard convened under the Barbados National Standards Institution, and I know Peter was on that committee and members from the Labour Department. So now we actually have a standard on air quality. A standard exists, but again, it has not yet gone the whole course. So again, we want to lobby for that. So I think we all should leave here with a commitment that we're going to lobby for a system of inspectorate. We have a template, if you will, looking at the competent persons already in existence under the Safety and Health at Work Act. We want to lobby for the building code to be proclaimed, or whatever is done there, any supporting documents and regulations, and we certainly want to lobby for the indoor air quality standard. We have a standard. Someone was asking earlier what we can do to get around borrowing all these standards from overseas. Well, certainly that particular one, we made a reference to standards overseas. There's no sense trying to create something independently and fall below the bar. But what would have happened there is that you would have pulled the items out of ASHRAE standards and other standards which are relevant to our environment. And then we have something that we can use and can be useful to protect our citizens. So let us all leave this commitment that we want to lobby for the indoor air quality standard to come out, the building code, and regulations under the Safety and Health at Work Act, as well as a functioning system of inspectors, as we've heard several times. Thanks.
Then how do we institutionalize this group as a lobby group?
Trevor, did you hear that? We're going to be institutionalizing this group as the lobbying group. Here.
That's too important to miss. Can we get her?
An advocate.
Good afternoon, Janelle Phillip. As I was saying, I think that with all of the interests represented here from the various groups, I think that this would be the impetus to kind of get the fire going. Somebody spoke about the urgency. And if we, as the persons who are directly impacted, get together and really, rally for legislation to change, and not only from the HVAC standards, but as well from, we talked about the source, identifying the site, the building site, all of the things that impact making the decision to erect any particular type of building and looking at the use and the function of the building. And I think that it starts from that point in terms of identifying the standards for selecting sites, as well as the standards for construction, as well as the standards for building materials used in the particular buildings based on fit for purpose, and all of those things. And you can't, it's not something that you can just get up one day and, you know, fix. And I think that the persons directly impacted, the engineers, the property managers, the building owners, well, more so the professionals like Alan here, can have an impact in terms of identifying and establishing the standards, as well as lobbying for the legislation to be passed, to not only enforce, but also to monitor and make sure that when persons are not adhering to the legislation, that they are subsequently penalized.
Okay, thank you. I believe that we have the names and contact numbers and email addresses for everyone, so I am sure that we will be contacting you in the near future. Any other questions, comments? If not, oh, maybe. Bring roundabout.
Thank you, John Boyce, professional engineer. Let me say that I want to start by congratulating the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers and the presenters today. And I think that we've ended up, or at least we're going to end up, where we should, and that is that someone has to take on the responsibility of lobbying for these ideas to be implemented. And there's no better body than the Association of Professional Engineers. I just want to caution, though, not that I've heard this before, or that we've been through this before, because my friend Trevor is pretending that he's a teenager. But Trevor would have been like George, Gregory to a lesser extent, Erskine, I'm sure, and a number of others here would have been through iterations of this same approach. So it's not that it is new, but that every time we approach a problem, we approach it with new information and with additional information which we can use. And I hope that we take that approach. Because one of the first things that happens when regulations are put in place in Barbados, and I have no doubt elsewhere, is that people who want to get ahead with what they call business start to look for shortcuts around that same regulation. You hear me, George? Good.
Yes.
So that we have got to inculcate in the industry an understanding of the importance of things like a building code. You're now recommended inspection of air-conditioned HVAC systems. We have already in place, and everybody's alluded to it, inspection of pressure vessels and boilers. Ask yourself or ask the Ministry of Labor, to what extent are these regulations being adhered to? And how many out of the thousands of pressure vessels in Barbados that require inspection, for instance, are actually being inspected on an annual basis? I believe a lot of the boilers get inspected, but these are things which we have to talk about. So when we set regulations in place, please let us be careful what we ask for and make sure that we set a staged or a measured inspectorate arrangement that allows business to continue safely. Because you will always hear, well, look, we want to adhere to the regulation, but you're holding up my operation. And yes, one of the things that we get a lot of in the seat where I sat for the last 10 years is inquiries as to how can we get around some of these regulations that have been put in place for one or other reason. From the time a person makes an application to town planning, the first telephone call they make is to how can we get that application out of town planning next week. When they're told it has got to go to the Ministry of Transport for the Chief Technical Officer to review the traffic, do a traffic impact study. Why do we need that? Don't talk about if it goes to Emil at the Barbados Building Standards Authority to have review, which he has been doing for about 25 years now. And you know, we have these regulations in place, but the first thing we do after we leave this room, making the arrangements, is that we go outside now and say, now, how can we start getting around these things? So I'm just rising to say, yes, I support the positions taken. I think they're needed. I think that people like Dr. Ali and Harold, I'm not dumping Erskine and George out of the loop, but I know I'm accustomed to them, put it that way. But you see, what Dr. Ali and Harold are talking about are real positions. I made the quip over the morning session that the buildings that are closed in Bridgetown are going to be closed, but George assures us this one won't be. But the buildings that, like the Louis Lake Secondary School, for instance, if we want to take, there's no reason, according to the reports that I've seen, why the Louis Lake School still remains closed. But we have not even as professionals been able to come together in a position which says, look, this is the circumstances. PERT was or was not responsible for the incident at the Louis Lake Secondary School, and this is what it should be. You go up there and you see a building which has no semblance of air conditioning system, completely open building, completely abandoned, and wonder why. We talk about sewage plants and locations and this kind of thing. You know, you go all over the world and sewage plants are next door to massive high-rise structures operating out. It's the quality of the equipment that we purchase and the quality of the maintenance that we apply to this equipment that renders them safe or unsafe when they are in use. So I think that we are on the cusp of making a very important move in terms of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers. It has been talked about many, many times, and as I reach that stage in my life cycle, I would love to see it become not only a talk shop anymore, but let us start presenting tangible action plans as to what can be implemented. And if the regulations for legislation are not in place, well, the only thing to do is to lobby the departments so that the regulations do not require anything, any kind of passage in the House. They just need to be laid once they have been agreed to. I gather the regulations for the Shaw have been around and they're being reviewed, and Harold tells me they're just waiting on the next stage. So let's get together and lobby and have these things put in place. Or do we really want them? That is the question we have to ask. But, you know, I support the position taken and the overall idea that we should lobby to make sure that these measures are brought in place. It must be a measured process, carefully designed, and we can use the missteps of the past and the missteps from other countries in making sure that we design something that is especially applicable to the Barbadian environment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to wrap up by asking the juror, Vincent Jones, to come and make some comments on behalf of the jurors, and then we will close the session after.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly been an interesting session, and to see a lot of familiar faces, and certainly the multifaceted approach that the association has taken to speak into today's issue, I hope everyone realizes that regardless of your sphere of influence, whether you are a property manager, an engineer, an architect, a doctor, a health and safety professional, a union delegate, whatever role you may play, that we all have a role to play in this vexing issue that has been afflicting the Barbadian landscape in recent times. The approach that the association has taken, as President Brown would have mentioned earlier, is to have a jury convened to basically examine the discussions that would have been held over today's seminar and to put forward a position on behalf of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers. We will hope to have such a position ready within the next 3 weeks, and that position would then be sent to the necessary regulatory personnel. We'd also post that position on our website, and as was alluded to earlier, we will then seek to lobby that position, as we have done with previous position pertaining to the pothole situation in Barbados. So, in terms of my comments from the jury side, we obviously will withdraw and consider carefully all that has been presented here today. I cannot pronounce at this juncture what our position would be, as there's much food for thought. But I invite you to keep or watch this space, and certainly, as has been said, we hope that once we put forward that learned position, that it will be supported by all and sundry who are here. In terms of the vote of thanks, the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers has, as part of its articles in the Code of Ethics, that professional engineers shall have proper regard for the safety, health, and welfare of the public in the performance of his professional duties, shall notify the proper authorities of any situation which he considers on the basis of his professional knowledge to be a danger to public safety or health. We also have in Article 4, shall endeavor to extend public understanding of engineering and its place in society, shall endeavor at all times to enhance the public regard for and its understanding of his profession or her profession by extending the public knowledge thereof and discouraging untrue, unfair, or exaggerated statements with respect to professional engineering. We have sought today to engage you, our public, and keeping to our articles in that regard. This issue, as I said earlier, has been a multifaceted approach, and we are thankful that we have been able to present to you a set of presenters who have approached it from the various aspects in which it must be considered. It is not solely an engineering issue, an architectural issue, a health and safety issue, or a medical issue, but certainly aspects of all must form a part of any solution that is to be generated. We had quite a bit of information that was shared today, and I shall very quickly just run through some of what was said. Mr. Oxley told us that from the Merriam-Webster that syndrome is a group of signs and symptoms that occur together and characteristically a particular abnormality or condition. Building syndrome being described as situations where occupants experience acute health and comfort effects and appear to be linked to time spent in a particular environment or building. He expanded upon what indoor quality was. He spoke a little bit about the acceptable air, and he mentioned that the health impact and productivity and the capital costs of these items. He also expanded on the effects on humans, whether it was aesthetic, contact irritation, respiratory, allergic, narcotic, infectious disease, etc. And he expanded upon some of the illnesses that result based on these things. Also, we had Mr. Nicholson, which spoke about the abnormal absenteeism rates, medical insurance, and sicknesses, and so on. He spoke then extensively about what causes sick building syndromes in terms of looking at it from an HVAC professional point of view. Certainly critical design consideration, serviceability, floor plan layout, consequences. Mr. Rose told us about our ancestors 7,000 years ago, being the initiators of the sealed environment, as it were, seeking shelter against the elements. He examined a number of factors, including location, design quality, VOC emissions, dust pollutants, etc., and looked at the human experiences of space and how they can be impacted by various design considerations, shapes, proportions, etc. Dr. Allen then came in and she spoke to defining the medical challenges. What are the medical issues? Is it real or is it imagined? What is the spectrum of the illness? How are the symptoms treated? And defining the most vulnerable individuals. So all in all, we've had a quite comprehensive set of information presented. These presentations also will be available on our website, and we hope that you would seek to use that as a point of reference for the future. We want to thank very quickly our sponsors for today's event, TMR Services Limited, Alcar Cleaning Enterprises, the Williams Group, Kent Construction, Shelbury Construction, Godson Builders, the Jada Group, Tropical Chem Limited, Marshall Trading, Barbados Light and Power, Masters Touch, the C.O. Williams Group of Companies, and Shelbury Construction. Certainly without their financial assistance today would not have been possible. Finally, I'd just like to say that we all, again, as I said earlier, must play our part in this issue. I thank you for taking the time to join with us today, and I would ask that you go away and certainly share the information that you have learned today with your colleagues and your various offices. Thank you. Paula?